Soon afterwards, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched her. That's the word I don't know how to pronounce. Shout it out if you know it. Thank you. Oh, so beer existed even back then. And the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country.
Oh, right. We don't have very many kiddos here. I thought I saw Arabella. Do I see you over there? Yeah, but no Zeke and no Eli. No Joshua yet. Oh, you're here. Good deal, Jack. How many of you guys have a favorite toy? Who's got a favorite toy? Yeah, Arabella's got hers with her. Do you have one, Jack? What's your favorite toy? What is it? Oh, right. Okay. What's yours favorite? Drawing. So a piece of paper and a pencil. That's your favorite toy? Got it. What's your favorite, Pippa? A Barbie. Oh, yeah. Luke, I bet it's a PlayStation. What is it? Sonic the Hedgehog. David's got one, but he's not going to tell me, and that's absolutely fine. So how would you feel if you lost your favorite toy? That would never happen? What if all the paper and all the pencils in the whole world were lost? I bet you'd feel sad, wouldn't you? How would you feel, Luke? All right, you guys are ruining my illustration. I'd be fine. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I don't care. Would you be devastated, Jack, if you lost your favorite toy? Yeah, he's already sad just thinking about it. How would you feel, Arabella? You would feel terrified. Yeah, and she's squeezing that toy. How many of you, your favorite toy wasn't your favorite toy last year? You had a different favorite toy. That's what I thought. In fact, next week you'll have a favorite toy. You will, won't you, Arabella? Yeah, and you'll feel terrible if you lose that one as well. So here's another question. Who is your favorite person? Jack? You always say, I know. And Nanny, and then Daddy's number 3. Got it. Okay. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, who's your favorite, Arabella? Oh, they're all equally favorites? Got it. Luke, who's your favorite? Yourself. There's a good answer. I like that one. Yeah. Right. Who's your favorite, Theo? God, and Theo always gives that answer, or Jesus, right? That's always the good answer for that. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me how you would feel if if your favorite person in the whole world went away and you could never see them again. Would that be terrible? You'd be terrified. Would that be, well, yeah, because that'd be your whole family, wouldn't it? And how would you feel worse if you lost your favorite toy or if your favorite person in the whole world went away? What do you think? Who would feel worse if they lost their toy? Who would feel worse if the favorite person went away and never came back? Yeah, well, that's good at least. At least we're kind of on the same track there. Today, Colin is going to tell us about a time when a lady lost the most important thing in the world to her. And it's really, really sad. But something amazing happened. And I'm not going to tell you what that is, because you have to pay close attention, all right? So you can go and get your books, and you can fill those in, but make sure you're listening to what Colin has to say. Colin is going to be actually probably asking you some questions as well, so make sure you're listening up to those. And by the way, kids, Jen got me some new sweets this week, so do a good job on your books, and you can have a sweet at the end. Well, most of you, I think, know Colin Dyer. He used to be the minister, the pastor at Alverstoke. And how long were you at Alverstoke?
Nearly 20 years.
Nearly 20 years. So he's been around for a long time, a lot longer than I've been around, at least in this area. I'm not saying I've probably been around longer than you have on this earth, but Colin is here with us, and he's going to be sharing with us this morning. I'm really excited to hear what Colin has to say. So, Colin, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Great.
And let you take over.
No, thank you. Right, well, I think it's ages since I spoke here, years ago since I spoke here, so I don't expect many of you to know me. But we're going to be looking at that passage today. It's worth bearing in mind that what's written there in Luke chapter 7 is a historical event. It was witnessed by the people who followed Jesus and by many others. And if you look at Luke chapter 1, you'll find out that Luke there describes how he gathered his stories together, both from the eyewitnesses and also from those who'd had the message and the details of Jesus passed on to them. Right, so we're going to look at the person of Jesus. We'll see how we get on time-wise. Anybody know who that is? Oh, well done. Excellent. Well, he was interviewed once upon a time about what he thought about Jesus. And there's two questions I've grabbed out of that interview. And he was asked, to what extent are you influenced by Christianity? And he said, as a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and in the Talmud. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. That's Jesus. That's what he had to say. He was also asked, do you accept the historical existence of Jesus? And he said, unquestionably, no man can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. So stunning things he said. He doesn't claim to be a Christian, but obviously had a good knowledge of the Bible and the Jewish book, the Talmud. So that was the first thing. Now, second thing just to mention is that we know about Jesus because of the Gospels. And I'm going to give a couple of quotations from John's Gospel. And in John's Gospel, he says, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Those are incredible statements that the Son, who is God, has made himself known. Later on, Philip would ask Jesus, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you such a long time? So basically, those couple of verses, and there's more in John's Gospel, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father, make it very, very clear that in Jesus we see the exact representation of God in human form. So when we see Jesus, we see the invisible God. So when we read in the New Testament that God is love, we look in the Gospels to see how that is demonstrated and worked out in the life of Jesus. Another way of putting it is the invisible God is made visible in Jesus. Because sometimes you're asked, aren't you, by friends, work colleagues, maybe members of your family, well, nobody's ever seen God. And you should be able to immediately say, well, actually, if you were alive 2,000 years ago, you would have seen God if you'd seen Jesus. So those are a few things to bear in mind. When you look at Jesus, all that he said and did, most of the guessing games about God tail off into silence. So that's just a short introduction, really, to what we're looking at today. And we're looking at a funeral. not the happiest of occasions. Those of us who are older will have had first-hand experience, perhaps, of a loved one or friend dying. And it's a grim time, and especially in this particular story, it's a grim time for the woman. Now, I'm going to test you on this. I'll give you a handout in a minute. But this woman, do you know what she's described as, boys and girls and adults? A widow. Okay, yeah. She's described as a widow because she is a widow. What does a widow mean? Yes.
It means that
Your
your husband died.
husband died. Excellent. Yes. So this woman has lost her husband already. What else has she lost? Yes. Son. Excellent. Yes. You lost. Let's put that over there. Lost a son. Anything else? Lost a husband. Let's put this on here. Yeah, and anything else? Yes. Oh, well, you're not putting your hand up. Yeah. Well, in Jewish thinking, life and death was not sort of as clear cut as we would tend to think of it today. She is experiencing a living death. If you know Ruth in the Old Testament, she lost her sons, she lost her husband, and when she came back, she told them to call her bitter because of how tough life had been. She was right in the depths because of what happened. So that's the situation of this lady. She has lost not only a son, but what kind of son? There was a word in there. Anybody, any idea? Sorry? Only son. Thank you. Now, some of those things we'd be able to cope with better today than they would have been in their day. To lose your husband is to lose the person who brings the money in and who works the fields and sustains people. There's no health care that you can fall back on or subsidies from the government because those sorts of things just did not happen. She's in a wretched condition, and we find her in there. Right, let's just have a quick think about funerals in their day. And I'll start off by asking you, what characterises a funeral in Britain today? What sort of things are there as a part of a funeral? Yes? Graveyard, that's a good one. Graveyard, yes. Or it could be somewhere else. Sorry? A buffet lunch, yes. You notice Glenn just did a buffet lunch, not a big spread, because he's a bit tight, I guess, on that. Yeah, what else do you see when you come to a funeral? Flowers, excellent, yes. What's the atmosphere like? Noisy, quiet? Yes? Singing, yes, you have singing, usually. It depends. These days you have less singing, because nobody knows the same songs. You have singing. Yeah, anything else? Yes. It's quieter. Brilliant, yes. And what do people wear usually at a funeral? Yes. Black. Excellent. So all of those things there are what we find today. Now, in our particular passage here today, well, if we just take the grave, it probably was a wicker. We called it a beer. Shall I spell it that way, just to be easier? A wicker beer that was being carried in, yeah. And it would have been walking procession, whereas today you'd normally have the hearse being driven in. It would have been a walking procession. There would have been no flowers, because that didn't come in until later on in Western funerals to represent the resurrection and the confidence in that. Anything else that you know about Middle Eastern funerals that you've seen on the telly that we haven't had mentioned? Yes? Not much singing, no. I don't think there was any singing, actually. Okay. Wailing, thank you. And that's not, we could have misspelled that as well. Some of them were fishermen, but that's not what we're talking about. This would have been very loud. because they actually employed some people to wail and mourn, actually paid people to come along to the funeral and join with the person who's been bereaved and join in noisily with their wailing. So you'll see that quite often. They also, in those days, they would have buried the person in the same day that they passed away, after they'd spent a little while in the house. So it was quite a different sort of thing. It's a very loud and emotional event. You know, most of our funerals, you don't have anybody sort of bursting into tears, do you? Occasionally it happens, but not generally. Well, that was a situation that Jesus encountered as he approaches the town of Nain. And so when they had a funeral procession like that, the women would be out the front leading it. So the widow would have been amongst them. So they would have led the procession. Then you've got the people with the bier who are wobbling a little bit from side to side as a consequence. The bier is the casket in which the dead person is held. Some call them pallbearers, and they'd swap around who carried it as it made its way out. They'd have a couple of flute players, well, at least one, and mourners, and then there was the crowd as well. So that is what Jesus is encountering as he comes in, probably from the east, into this village of Nain. And we know that he came in that way because of the layout of the land, and there is actually a cemetery to the east of Nain. So we know all of that. And Nain sounds like pleasant, but on this particular day it's far from pleasant, because this lady has lost everything. She doesn't know how she's going to survive now without her closest family gone. This pleasant place overlooks the valley of Jezreel, and because of their customs, they would be burying the person in the evening, so around about 6 p.m., and the whole town would come out for the funeral. So we're talking probably 100, 200, 300 people coming out of the village with this poor young dead boy, the only son of this widow. And the crowds, we reckon there's 100 to maybe 300 coming out of the town. A little bit difficult to guess that. But the people with Jesus are described as a great multitude. And one of the things that happens with funerals in this country, or should do, is that what happens when you come to traffic lights, or when it comes to getting onto the main flow of traffic, what do other cars normally do? Give way. Excellent. Yeah, and it seems that that's exactly what happened as Jesus approaches. The procession continues, and presumably the crowd with Jesus make way for it and go either side of it. Now, we read in the passage several things about what Jesus does in this situation. There's 5 things I want to pick out, and I'm very much helped by others on these things. 5 things, let's see if we can get them. How does Jesus love this woman? Anything, it's got to come from the passage. I'm not looking for anything really deep, but yes, were you going to answer something? No? Okay. Right, anybody else? Yes? He saw her, yes. He saw her. Whoops. Excellent. What else does he do? Yes. Saw her faith in him. I don't know if he did see them, but I think that's worth putting up. Certainly she probably had faith in God to do something and act on their behalf. What else does he? He had compassion on her. Yes. Now, am I right that you looked at the Good Samaritan last week? Or not? Did I make that up? The prodigal son. Okay. He had compassion on her. I mentioned that because the 3 people that passed the man beaten up beside the road, only one of them did his heart go out towards the individual who was broken beside the road. And Jesus here, his heart goes out to this woman. Now that should be a huge encouragement to us, because this woman really is at the lowest ebb in her life. She's lost everything, as we've looked at on the chart here. She doesn't know where her next meal is coming from, and yet Jesus looks at her and his heart goes out towards her. And as we see in this story, and we'll see, he moves towards her in love to deal with her sorrow and her wretched condition. He is moved by what he sees. Now, if you look at the passage, he looked at her with compassion. That is not the easiest thing to describe. Sometimes we notice in a person that they are feeling for us, but to actually describe what they're like is not always easy. So I want us to look at two things here. There's anger and compassion. What do you see when somebody's angry? Yes. Yes, a red face. Oh, we have to keep you youngsters in longer here, don't we? Because you actually take part. That's great. Red face, that could be if you get really, really angry. Yes? Sorry? Oh, they stamp their feet. Yes. I'm really thinking we'll put that up. Stamp their feet. Yes, that's a good one, though. Yeah, let's see if anybody else got something. Yes? Sweat. Swear. Or you might do, yes. It is Lee Park, yeah. It's not Alverstoke. Yeah, excellent, yeah. You also might see lines on the eyes, mightn't you? Because when you get angry, you know, you might grimace, you might grit your teeth, you might, you know, and but what we read here is obviously Jesus was not angry, but what we do read here is that he looked on this woman with compassion. They could see that on his face. He was not unmoved by her condition. In fact, the very opposite. He moved towards her. Now try and think, what does compassion look like on somebody's face? Some of these things might be the opposites, but I'll let you work that out. Yes? Calm face. Well, that is excellent. Yes, I think so. Yeah, he looked on her with compassion. Yes? Head tilt. Yes. My dog does that to hear things. But yes, but could do that, yeah? He could smile. Yes, he could smile. Tears? Yes. Matt, you were too late. Yeah, tears. It could be tears. Anything else? Yes. Be kind. Yes. Excellent. Now, the reason I emphasize those things because he looked on the woman with compassion, and those who were eyewitnesses saw that on him. And they saw an intensity in the way he was looking. Bear in mind, there's several hundred people coming out of the village, and there's probably a couple of thousand of people with Jesus. There was an awful lot you could have looked at. You could have looked at the beer, you could have looked at the wailers, you could have looked at the woman, you could have looked at the crowd, all sorts of things. But they saw on Jesus a concern directed specifically at this person. There are many of you in this room who've experienced that from Jesus. Not in a physical reality of actually seeing his face, but he has been at work in your life. You've felt and experienced his love for you. He's picked you out. You may have felt worthless. You may have felt right in the depths. And yet Jesus did a work in your life. He fixed his eyes on you. His heart went out towards us. And what a change that brought about. Now, because these people, Jesus could have been looking at all sorts of things, but he's concentrating on this woman. His heart went out to her. And as we've said, those people who were with Jesus saw that, and they saw this movement of him towards them. Now, if you are walking with Jesus and looking at him, you probably have seen a quietness and a stillness. There is something about compassion, isn't it, that tends to slow things down and be calm as you weigh up the situation of the other person and think about whether you're going to say what you're going to say, whether you're going to touch them or hug them if that's appropriate. But they notice this about Jesus, this compassion. Because this woman has lost everything, and she's lost her only son, the one that she hoped would grow up to look after her. And then we read in the passage that Jesus said to the woman, "Do not cry." So we haven't got the procession up there, but she's in that first bunch of people. Jesus specifically goes up to her because there's a huge crowd there. There's a great amount of noise, comes up to her and says, "Do not cry." If you fall over, boys and girls, and even adults actually, because some of you are an age where you might start doing that sort of thing. You know, if you, when you're young and you fall over and you're sobbing your eyes out, when an adult comes up to you and says, "Do not cry," why do they say, "Do not cry" to you? Yes?
So you don't cry out loud every time and it doesn't hurt your ears.
Oh, okay. That's very good. That's good imagination there. Yes. But for instance, what is your name here in the front? Theo. Well, Theo, if you fell over and really scratched your knee, and one of your parents said, "Oh, do not cry," that's because they know it's going to get better, and it's going to be all right, and you don't need to bother. Except, of course, if you're on casualty, when they say, "Oh, you'll be well," you know that person is destined to die. But when Jesus comes up to this woman and says, "Do not cry," I mean, that could be one of the cruelest things to say to a person in that situation, because she has lost everything. And Jesus isn't saying, "Do not cry," get yourself together, buck your ideas up. He says, "Do not cry" to her, because he knows what he's going to do. And we find him moving in this story. We find him, firstly, he saw Jesus. He looked at her with compassion. We thought just a little bit about what that looked like on his face, and they observed it with an intensity. And if you'd seen Jesus, you'd have noticed, who is he looking at? Because it was that obvious, and it's mentioned in the text. He came up to her and said, "Do not cry." And then he moves to the bier, the casket, where the little child is, or the young lad is. "Young man, I say to you, get up." By the way, Jesus has stopped the procession. I don't know if you noticed that. Jesus walked up and he touched the bier, and it stopped. So it continued to move through the crowds, as sort of illustrated earlier. But he just comes up very calmly and touches it, and the whole procession comes to a stop. And there is a call to attention to what is going on in this, to notice these events. And usually, if you want to stop someone, it takes a lot of effort, doesn't it? If you've got somebody who maybe's got a flat tire on their car and you notice it, you would, generally speaking, have to come out, you gesticulate, wouldn't you, and point at the tire to get them to stop. But notice here, Jesus, all he does is just touch the casket with the dead child in, and the whole procession stops. And there's a sense perhaps in which the whole of this story sort of pauses at this time. What is Jesus going to do next? And then we finish up with a focus on Jesus, because Jesus gave this young boy, after he raised him from the dead, gave him back to his mother. Let me just have a look. Yeah, here we are. Jesus went to the widow. He says to her, "Do not cry." It's not just a platitude. It's not just get your emotions under control, because he's going to do something. Then he moves to the casket where the son is, and he tells him to get up, and he gets up and he starts talking, which, if you're Theo, is a rarity. But for this child, he's died, and you don't expect to hear anything from him. And then we hear that Jesus, when the child had risen up and he started talking, that Jesus took the son back to the widow. This woman who'd lost everything is suddenly reunited with her son that she thought was lost and gone. She now has a son who can help sustain her as she grows older. Her life that had seemed in bits has been put back together in a most remarkable way. And as a consequence of that, the news spreads, verse 17, all around the district as to what this Jesus has done. It is a remarkable experience of resurrection, of new life. And bear in mind that Jews in those days weren't meant to touch dead people because it made them unclean. It's almost like Jesus transfers his life to the dead child and takes his death upon himself, prefiguring what eventually he will do on the cross for all mankind. What an incredible day that was. And I just want to summarize it now with 3 things. And I get, with this study and with this talk today, I've drawn on people I've read from as well. But we notice the first thing that happened in this story is that Jesus looked with compassion and he saw her. And if you go through the Gospels, watch out for that, because you'll hear Jesus seeing the crowds, and he had compassion on them and taught them. He saw the crowds and he had compassion on them and fed them. And you keep getting this statement that he saw. Sometimes, if you've got somebody, would you normally shop in Lee Park, or would you go further if you're going to shop for food and things? Well, imagine you're going to Fareham, okay? And there's somebody beside the road who's begging for something. What do you tend to do? Be honest here. Don't be, we're Christians, so we must say the right thing. Sorry? You drive on, yes. Or you look away. A little bit like the Good Samaritan story. The 2 of them did that. So looking, sometimes we avert our gaze, don't we? Gaze from difficult and worrying and sorrowful situations because of the impact it'll have on us. Jesus doesn't avert his gaze. He fixes it on this woman. His heart moves towards her. He's going to do something about her. He's not going to just, do a few tweets on this and that, expressing his, concern for this person. He's actually going to do something. And he does by raising this son to life. And everybody is talking about him. So I'm aware of time, but we need to realize, Jesus can pick up a person from the greatest depths and restore to them and give them life. He has a particular interest in us, so much so that he moves towards us in his birth, in his life, and he continues today to move towards us through the Gospels as we consider him. And I wonder if you know him. I wonder, as we've gone through those 5 things, I think they were back here. There we are. As we've gone through those things, I wonder if anything there particularly has struck you. Because if this is what God is like, and it is what God is like, then if we're followers of Jesus, these things should characterize us. We're not meant to be distant people, who separate ourselves from awkward and trying situations. We ought to be people who involve ourselves with those around us who are in need of the gospel, of food, of money to sustain them. We are to give comfort and help. And notice that the focus is on Jesus. If South Today had been there in Nain that day, they would have sort of come to Jesus, with the microphone to give him a chance, because this is a brilliant chance to get the word out as to what Jesus is like. But you'll notice Jesus doesn't do a sermon. He doesn't big himself up as to what has happened. He just seems to quietly disappear into the crowd, and he's left this woman with her life put back together, and with a future and a hope now that the beginning of that day she never had. And I wonder if you're captivated by that, and whether we too are interacting with others in this way, because the Spirit of God wants to produce in us the very life of Christ by his Spirit.